Our guest today is Jordan Green of counsel at Perkins Coie in Phoenix. His practice focuses on white-collar criminal defense, corporate compliance, internal investigations, and commercial litigation. Approaching 60 years as a lawyer, Jordan is a fellow of the American College of Trial Lawyers and the International Academy of Trial Lawyers. Listing all of the honors and accolades Jordan has received would take up the entire podcast. Suffice to say that if anyone has made a best of, who's who, or super lawyers list, you'll find Jordan's name on that list. I have been privileged to know Jordan for over 30 years, both as a young associate looking for guidance and as a general counsel looking for help. Finally, if I'm ever able to tell a decent joke, it's likely due to what I learned from him. Welcome to the Corporate Law Lab, Jordan.
Thank you.
With me is Christian Buher. Is that close?
Yes.
I'm working on it. He is a second-year law student and is going to be our co-host for this episode. So let me just start with, I had originally in the outline describe your background and career, but at 60 years, I think we're going to have to skip a few steps, or it might take a while for you to go through 60 years of history. But so you grew up in Chicago, graduated from DePaul in 1965.
Yes.
How did you end up as a lawyer litigating in Arizona for the next 60 years?
Now, let me take the question and break it into a couple parts. How did I become a lawyer? I wanted to be an ichthyologist. And when my father discovered that that's what I wanted to do, he took me for a walk and persuaded me that by agreeing to pay for any school that I wanted to go to back away from ichthyology and try a more traditional graduate school, medical school, dental school, law school, something. And I chose law school. How did I get to Phoenix? My brother was alive and practicing law in Phoenix. And I did not want to practice law in Chicago. I may have had a jaundiced view, but it was apparent to me that um, the most successful lawyers were not actually trying cases. Um, they were participating in illegal activities involving bribes and other forms of persuasion on judges and prosecutors and police officers in the tradition of Chicago, and I wanted nothing to do with that. And so my brother and I talked about practicing law together, and that's how I wound up in Phoenix.
What steps in the beginning of your career do you see as making an impact on how you progress in your success? And on the other end, what decisions do you look back and wish you would have made?
Yeah, let me take the decisions I made that I think had a positive influence on my life. This will sound odd to you all, but as a young lawyer, um, I I saw people do things that I thought crossed the line. Um, and I worked for a judge the first 9 or 10 months that I lived here, who cautioned me about the practice of law and the opportunity to walk on one side or another of a line that talked about honesty and integrity, uh, and persuaded me. I was persuaded by him that it was important to proceed with caution and to stay away from behavior that could be described as on the wrong side of an ethics line. And I think that that young lawyers starting out need to remember that we're all of us engaged in a marathon, not a sprint. And while you may get away with cheating in one matter or another, in the long haul, you will not have um, succeeded in the practice of law and likely won't succeed in life. Um, when I first started here, and Neil, you recognize, I hope, that you have the gavel. And if I start telling stories that take too long, interrupt me and say so, and we'll move on. When I first
That's
started,
what editors are for.
yeah, okay. So when I first started practicing in Phoenix, actually when I was a law clerk to a trial judge, there was a five and dime store kitty corner from the courthouse called Newman's or Newton's or something like that. I don't remember the name of it. And it had a lunch counter. And the courthouse had law and motion day. So all the short causes and motions were heard on one day, and that usually was Friday. And on law and motion day, all the judges and all the lawyers who were going to appear in court that day, and even others, went to the dime store and had coffee, except those who had been caught cheating were ostracized. And so if they came in and asked to sit at your table, your answer was no, thank you. Um, it's unfortunate that, there's too many lawyers. There's no longer a dime store. There's no longer the opportunity to ostracize people in that way. But after practicing law for, I think, 57 or 58 years, I can tell you that effectively people who cheat, their reputation gets around and they are ostracized. Business isn't referred to them, uh, breaks aren't given them, they are treated as outliers, and you don't want to be in that group.
Yeah, and I think while it's changed in that there is not that, dime store or local cigar store where everybody congregates, with social media, one mistake, um, you know, not of omission, but of commission. Well, maybe both. But one ethical misstep like that is going to get around just in a different way than it used to.
Yeah. In the criminal law world, especially in state court, if you're a defense lawyer, you're a liar and a cheat presumptively, and you have to prove the contrary. Prosecutors always conclude that the defense lawyers are no damn good. In the civil arena, the presumption is the opposite. So you just have to learn how to play the deck as each case comes along and learn the circumstances in which prosecutors, for example, think you're a liar and a cheat, and civil lawyers don't.
So thinking in it's the civil side more, but also the criminal side, and talking about working with corporate counsel, which I'm sure has changed incredibly over time. There probably wasn't that many corporate counsel that you interacted with on a daily basis when you first started doing working in a firm after you were in the attorney general's office. How has it changed over time from your perspective, your dealings with house counsel?
Yeah. So let's divide the House counsel into two groups, the insurance company House counsel and the non-insurance company House counsel. The insurance company House counsel are the most sophisticated in-house lawyers when it comes to litigation because insurance companies are in the business of litigating. That's how they that's how they operate. Um, so their in-house lawyers are very sophisticated about litigation matters. In the non-insurance company in-house lawyers, um, the change goes something like this. First, the in-house lawyer generally was inexperienced at litigation and and inexperienced at criminal law issues. Um, and so they didn't play much of a part other than being the contact person in developing the case, trying the case. Um, today, the opposite is true. Most in-house lawyers have some experience, some more than others, and they play a central role in developing the strategy for the case, developing the steps of the case, uh, helping outside lawyers decide what to spend money on and what not to spend money on. Remembering now that the cost of litigation is so enormous that even the wealthiest businesses in the country have to make choices as litigation goes along in terms of what they are going to do and what they're not going to do. So the change is pretty dramatic, Neil, in terms of how sophisticated in-house lawyers are in litigation matters.
So when you're in litigation, can you think of some examples both on the positive and the negative side where having this much more involved corporate counsel and to be clear, when you and I worked together, I was probably on the much more involved side, maybe not to the level of an insurance company litigator. But, having been trained by people like you as a litigator, I felt like I still knew what I was doing enough to have an opinion. So you can even critique me if you'd like on the when did I drive you crazy by doing stuff that you wished I hadn't done as a
Yeah, I don't
client?
recall.
And
I don't recall that.
yeah,
But I think the thing that in-house lawyers do that makes me uh, most nervous is they're in the oh my God, the sky is falling camp. And what I need from in-house lawyers is a calming influence on the executives and the board of the company. I don't need somebody pouring gas on a fire that's already burning. On the good side of the in-house lawyers, they bring to the table the client view of litigation, of people, of witnesses, of experts. That's very important to know and understand and deal with. When you represent an individual, he expresses his views to you about everything. When you represent a company, that that happens only if in-house lawyers talk to you and tell you what they're seeing and what they're doing. And so, to me anyway, the most important part of in-house lawyering in litigation matters is the expression of the company's view of what's going on.
which requires that in-house lawyer to have a pretty deep understanding of the company's business and how they do what they do, right?
Yes, yeah. Without that, you're really hobbled by the in-house lawyer that you're hooked up with in a litigation matter. If he doesn't understand the business, then you've got to go yourself throughout the company to find somebody who can actually tell you how a certain process worked or who was involved in a particular event. And it takes forever to do it. If in-house lawyer is well versed in the company's business, all you have to do is say, Neil, how does this work? And Neil tells you, and then tells you who to go talk to support that view.
There were probably a few times where I said, "Let me go figure out how that works," but but sometimes I knew.
Yeah, well, I do the same. Sometimes I know, and sometimes I don't.
So I know I traditionally participated in witness prep, and I can see that cutting both ways from the perspective of the outside lawyer. I generally did it because I knew the person and I wanted them to feel like I was, in the same boat with them. I suppose it could also be looked at as like, I'm keeping an eye on them to make sure that they don't misbehave. But what's your thoughts about having corporate counsel participating in witness prep in litigation?
Um, as the late night stand-up comics say, it's complicated. Um, it doesn't. There is no single answer to the question. Um, if if there's an investigation by a regulatory agency that could lead to criminal charges being brought against the company and or individuals, um, I don't like in-house lawyers sitting in on the interviews until I have had a chance to understand where the case is going and how it's going and who might be and who might not be in the target sites of the government. If we're talking to a witness who's in the target sites of the government, I do not want in-house lawyers sitting there because that is uh, prone toward being some evidence of an effort to chill the or distort the testimony of a witness. If it's a purely civil case, then it depends on how sophisticated the in-house lawyer is, because I don't want an in-house lawyer to sit in on an interview and tell the witness, no, that's not how it happened. Um, uh, that's just not a good way to develop things. It's much better to create a memorandum of an interview and give it to in-house counsel and have in-house counsel come back and say, I think you ought to interview the witness again. Here are two pieces of paper that seem to suggest that what he told you in the first interview is not accurate. That's much better.
Right. Well, and there were certainly times where, where I just made a decision. I didn't want to be in an interview. Um, I can think of a few examples where there was someone's quite high profile in the company that needed to be interviewed. And my view of it was, okay, I'm going to send Jordan in there. If they both come out alive, figuratively, then I'll be glad that he's mad at Jordan for asking those impertinent questions. And frankly, if not, then it doesn't do me any good to be as an in-house counsel to be identified as the executioner. But in any event, I think that's another consideration that you need to think of when you're in-house is sometimes it's very tempting to want to be in the middle of the action. And something interesting is about to happen. That a very skilled questioner is going to do his thing, and it's fun to watch at times. But there's times when, for your standing in the company, you need to be as far away from that room as you can get. Um, Kind of backing up to we're in situations where we know there's litigation or it's coming. But when corporate counsel is in that, I'm not sure quite what this is yet. Do you have any kind of rule of thumb as to when they should be reaching out to you? Do they call too early? Who would ever say that as an outside lawyer? Or what happens when they call too late?
Well, calling too late is a disaster. Looking for a place to happen. Calling too early, depending on the relationship between the in-house lawyer and the out-house lawyer, um, can never hurt. But if the relationship is such that there's a good deal of experience and that leads to a good relationship of trust, then the in-house lawyer can say easily, Jordan, do we need to start doing something now, or can we put this on the back burner until something else happens? And you get a legitimate answer. In some cases, it's good to just put it on the back burner. In other cases, it might be worthwhile to advance the ball. And in still other cases, there's opportunity to discuss it, depending on how risk averse the company is, what the likelihood is that witnesses might leave the company. Just for example, Neil, in the world of underground mining, whether open pit uh, or traditional mining, um, when the mine runs out of copper, then the employees leave and go to some other state, some other place to engage in the business of mining. And so then there's an accident, and you have to go all over the country to find these witnesses. And the longer you wait before you try to find them, the more likely it is they'll disappear. They'll wind up mining in South Africa or Canada or New Zealand or Australia or some other place, and you'll never find them. So I think in-house lawyer and out-house lawyer who have a wealth of experience together and trust one another can easily figure out, based on the circumstance, whether it's time to get out-house lawyer involved or not.
So how do you build that relationship?
It takes time. It takes uh, direct communication, um, and it does not necessitate fancy golf clubs or nights out at expensive restaurants, which is what most people think it takes. What it really takes is a hot dog or a cup of coffee or some other experience that's just basic human communication on a level of personal uh, personal information and the development of trust. If the first time outside lawyer is engaged, he is found not to have been candid with in-house counsel, then that ought to be the end of the relationship. Um, but but over time, people begin to trust one another, and when that happens, then you can call outside lawyers and say, "Is it time for me to engage or not?" and get a real answer and not one driven by the lawyer's desire to earn fees.
Well, and what you said about the fancy dinners and golf, I mean, from our own experience together, when we talk about, you know, things we did together, I, we've never played golf, and I can count on one hand the number of truly fancy dinners that we've had. But the bad meal we had in Paris, or the trying to play darts in a 4 foot high ceiling in outside of London, or shopping for underwear in Colombia when when the bags didn't arrive. Those are the kind of things that you go back to. It's not that's really, how you build the relationship. It is not, on a golf course.
Yeah, but there's so much more to that bad dinner. First of all, it was French lawyers who picked the restaurant. How you could find a way to have a bad meal in Paris is beyond me, but those lawyers figured it out. And then they told us they wouldn't help us, even though they were company counsel, because they had some goofy idea about to whom they owed a duty of loyalty. And then
Ah,
third, they walked out on the bill.
okay.
You had to pay the
I, for,
bill.
I forgot I had to. Luckily, we had a finance guy with us who paid the bill.
Oh God.
In When you're in-house counsel and you're in a crisis situation, what's the most important thing from your perspective that
Don't
corporate
don't
counsel needs to do?
Yeah. Two things. One, don't throw gas on the fire. Don't start screaming about the sky is falling. And two, engage lawyers and outside experts who are experienced in crisis management. That's the key.
When do you need to call a lawyer who doesn't have experience with the company? Somebody who's truly independent. Do you do that based on advice, or is there something you just know that, oh, now it's time for me not to call Jordan, who I've worked with for years, but I need to get on a plane and go to DC and find the expert on this thing.
Um, I don't know precisely how in-house lawyers figure that out. As you and I work together, and as I have worked with other in-house lawyers, one way to figure that out is to ask me because I'll tell you. And I think legitimate lawyers regardless of their experience, will tell you, I'm not the right guy for this job, or I think we need an expert, an outside expert lawyer in this field, or something. And that's the kind of relationship you want to have with outside counsel. You want to have the relationship such that if you call and say, I need help, here's the problem, that lawyer will say, I can't help you because that's outside my wheelhouse. Or
Yeah, I mean,
there's other reasons why an independent lawyer ought to be involved.
I can think of a specific example when I called you needing export compliance help. You said, not only am I not the right guy, the right person is not in Phoenix. You need to call this person in DC. And if you don't like that person, we'll help you find another. That's not the only person out there, but this is not expertise you're going to find, in my firm or any other firm in town.
Yeah. Just circling back to this trust business, you just have to have outside lawyers that you could trust to tell you um, that they're not capable, that the work is outside their wheelhouse. And by the way, the law firm that we're talking about, Neil, was merged with a 1,300 lawyer law firm this week.
Yep.
A law firm whose name I did not even know.
Me either. But we'll we may have some of those people on later, so we can't talk about their silly name.
Yeah, okay.
They'll know who they are, though. Our friend Peter Baird he coined a phrase called barogenesis, which is where the client develops a problem that he wouldn't have had if he hadn't met his lawyer.
Yeah.
Uh, can you think of any examples of that where you've dealt with in-house counsel where that's been the case?
No, not where I've been personally involved. I know I've been regaled with stories of what in-house lawyers have done to get themselves into instead of out of trouble. Um, but I've never had the problem myself.
Okay. Christian, I'm going to let you jump in with your second question here.
Corey, I think this will mesh well with what we spoke about at the beginning of the podcast. Are there certain values and ideals that you've tried to follow and keep close, just to keep that love of the law alive and the reasons why you went to law school in the first place?
Now we're assuming there that love is a thing you still feel towards the law after all
Yeah.
these years.
Um, a few things. Number one, don't be wary about trying to fill your plate with 100% work that produces income for you. Instead, always include in the work that you do some pro bono effort that is exactly what you would like to do. Um, so whether it's helping an illegal immigrant deal with the process they're in, or whether it's an inmate in a prison who needs help dealing with some issue, or it's some poor person who's looking for help with a landlord-tenant dispute, whatever it may be, get yourself involved in small pieces of pro bono work that are exactly the kinds of things that you thought of when you went to law school about what you'd like to do. Always having some of that kind of work on hand helped me um, a lot in terms of keeping my enjoyment of the practice of law at a high level. The second thing is don't get so fractured over billable hours. And big law firms talk about billable hours, and young people in law firms talk about, do I get billable hour credit for going to lunch with a client? And do I get billable hour credit for this, that, the other thing? When I started practicing law and I wanted to improve as a trial lawyer, I walked across the street from our offices in the Lures Tower in downtown Phoenix to the courthouse to watch John Flynn, who was a then locally famous criminal defense lawyer in Phoenix, try a case. And I didn't make 10 cents watching him directly, but I learned a hell of a lot. And I spent a lot of time at the courthouse just watching other lawyers try cases. Um, and and that will help you enormously enjoy the practice of law because it's a wonderful profession. It has been just a great opportunity for me.
And for those that don't know, John Flynn was the trial lawyer for Ernesto Miranda in the famous Miranda versus Arizona case. Although I guess it was our our buddy John P. Frank that argued the case at the court, right?
No, actually, John Flynn argued
He
Miranda.
did. Wow.
Yes,
Okay. So
but he
Frank
was
was
heavily
writing the brief.
coached. He was heavily coached by John.
So I said at the beginning that if I know how to tell a joke, it's because of what you taught me. And I wanted to close on this, not because I want to tell jokes, but because the difference between how I would tell a joke and what I learned from you was that I would just go straight to the punchline. And you would say, no, wait a minute. The punchline, it's totally terrible without the story around it. And I think that goes for so much of what we do as counseling people. I think my initial efforts as a in-house lawyer managing a compliance program, laying down a list of rules was compliant but almost useless. Building stories around what I was trying to convey actually got me to a point where people were listening. So if you could just, talk to how important that's been in your practice and how a young lawyer should think about that, knowing that they don't graduate with a bunch of stories in their pocket.
Yeah, um, and I'm not sure that you really need stories so much as asking yourself the question, who's the audience? The first question I asked Neil 2 days ago when we talked a little while about today's presentation was, who's the audience? So if you ask yourself before you start talking, who is the audience? You will then give yourself an opportunity to think about how best to present things. If, as Neil says, if you decide to lay down a bunch of rules uh, to folks who are uh, employed in the same organization you are, and you have to do this, and you have to do that, and you have to do this, and you have to do that, you're not going to score a lot of points. And those people are not going to take away from the meeting how important all of this might be. If, though, on the other hand, you said, look, everybody makes mistakes. If this company makes a mistake and some federal agency starts looking at it, we want to be able to demonstrate that we had a plan to keep ourselves from being in trouble. And the plan includes a set of requirements. Those requirements are A, B, C, D, and E. If we follow those, even if we make a mistake, prosecutors have agreed to give us a break. So here are the rules that we need to follow to avoid the problem. They will listen to you. But if on the other side of the coin, you walk into the room, close the door, and say the following things will be done, A, B, C, D, and E, ain't going to happen. Not when they don't have an explanation for why, or as Neil says, the run up to the punchline. They need to understand why you're giving them the advice that you're giving them.
So I should ask you the final, question that somebody taught me a long time ago for in a deposition is, what did I not ask you that I should have asked you?
Nothing.
There we go. Done. Thank you very much. Have a great
Welcome.
day.
Thank you.
And thanks for doing it.
You
All
bet.
right. Okay. Cheers.
Aye.